I'm Julia Boorstin, CNBC senior media and tech reporter, author of the book When Women Lead, and co-founder of CNBC's Closing the Gap coverage. I am very excited as we close out Women's Heritage Month to be hosting this Closing the Gap Make It streaming show featuring the change makers investing in driving diversity to deliver social and economic returns. And we have an amazing lineup of guests today. These are people who are really building strong businesses and doing so by really trying to change the business world as we know it. First up, we have an amazing duo, Freada Kapor Klein and Mitch Kapor. They're founding partners of Kapor Capital and authors of Closing the Equity Gap, Creating Wealth and Fostering Justice in Startup Investing. This is a book that was just released by Harper Business on March 14th. Congratulations. I want to start off with both of you to hear a little bit about your investing thesis. Your investing thesis is the core of your book. And I have to say, I featured you and your work in my book, When Women Lead, and it's just been remarkable to see the amazing impact you've had on so many founders. Freada, why don't you start us off? What's your investing thesis?
Our investment thesis, well, first of all, it's lovely to see you again, and I loved our conversation when you were writing your book. So our investment thesis is to look for high-growth tech startup core business closes gaps of access or opportunity or outcome for low-income communities and or communities of color. When we do that, we create products and services that help everyone and lift all boats.
And Mitch, explain to us how this investment thesis translates directly into financial opportunity for investors. This is not about a nonprofit venture. You're not doing this to have a social impact solely. You're also having a financial impact.
Correct. So we published impact reports in 2019, updated in 2022, and it showed for over 140 companies in the aggregate, our returns were in the top quartile, the top 25% of all venture funds, regardless of how they invested. So it was absolutely superior performance, both creating social value and economic value at the same time, not concessionary.
So not concessionary, but Freada, what's so interesting, and we've talked about this in the past, your investing thesis is really different. Most people don't tend to invest in diverse founders. The vast majority of investment dollars go to men. The majority of those dollars go to white men. That is not the way you have traditionally invested. And all the data seems to indicate that what you're doing is really data driven. Why aren't more people investing the way you are?
Well, I think it is habit. Bad habit, I might add, that they're investing based on what they've always known. And once you see what our financial returns are through this kind of investing, and others have also proven it, then I think if you really are interested in maximizing financial returns, you will use an impact lens and you will use a diversity lens.
But so going forward now, I mean, you wrote this book, you put this thesis out in the world, but talk to us about your work to make the venture world more diverse, because if you have more diverse investors, they will perhaps be more likely to invest in more diverse founders. But how are you approaching that ecosystem?
Well, great question. And we really do think about ecosystem change. And we think about it at every level. So we think about, first and foremost, who's at our own table? Who's on our own investment committee? Who's making the decisions about which founders to back? It turns out that the demographics of the investing team have an awful lot to do with which entrepreneurs feel comfortable approaching you. And so it isn't actually a good investment strategy if everyone around the table looks the same and you are discouraging the majority of the US population and the majority of the world's population from approaching you. You want to hear the best ideas wherever they come from. We also use a distance traveled metric when we're evaluating a business. And we think that that is a much better way, both to evaluate candidates who apply for jobs at Kapor Capital, as well as to evaluate the resilience and the character of our entrepreneurs.
Yeah, that distance traveled concept makes so much sense. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to say, and it seems like a key piece of this puzzle of understanding how to identify promising entrepreneurs Talk to us a little bit about the sectors where you are focused right now, where the fund is focused right now, and where you see opportunity going forward.
Well, yeah, go ahead.
The interesting thing is that there can be gap closing companies in education, in fintech, in health, in workplace. So we're sector agnostic, but what all of the companies have in common is that within their sector, they close a gap of access or opportunity or outcome for low-income communities and or communities of color.
Yeah, I mean, you were just mentioning that you're at Harvard Business School, you've been at the Kennedy School, you've been talking about your thesis. There was a Harvard Business School study about your work. What do you think the most important takeaway is for our viewers right now about the financial opportunity in taking your approach?
I think the most important message is you are losing out if you are using old-fashioned criteria. Pedigrees do not signal entrepreneurial grit. Distance traveled signals entrepreneurial grit. We want to know about a founder's lived experience that helped them identify the very problem that they are coming up with a solution for. Do they have a passion for getting through all of the hurdles that accompany entrepreneurs on that journey? And you're going to be hearing from Phaedra in our portfolio, and her distance traveled story and her lived experience drive her incredibly successful business.
That feels like a perfect opportunity to bring in Phaedra. I want to thank both of you, Mitch and Freada, Kapor, Klein, Mitch, Kapor, Freada, Kapor, Klein. Thank you both so much for joining us. Congratulations on the publication of your book, which addresses all of these issues. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Our pleasure.
So now we bring in the founder of a company that Kapor Capital invested in, Phaedra Ellis-Lamkins. She's the co-founder and CEO of Promise. It's a company which helps reduce delinquencies and increase revenue while helping people pay off their debt sooner with fewer penalties. Now, Kapor is an investor, and she is featured in their book. I believe she is chapter 4. So thank you so much for joining us, Phaedra. Tell us a little bit about Promise Pay and why you founded this company.
Yeah. First, thank you so much for having me. Promise is a company dedicated to helping people who are struggling and partnering with government to do that. So we bring money into government through interest-free payment plans so people don't face the consequence of government debt, losing your driver's license, ending up incarcerated, having your water shut off. Because that same flexibility you get when you buy a Peloton, we think people who are struggling deserve that same flexibility with government debt. We also help government get money out to people who need it the most. So that looks like partnering with the state of Virginia to be able to help water aid get out via text instead of having to come into an office, and you provide a copy of your taxes and to make the case to prove you're poor. And instead, we want to make it as easy as possible to get the support you need.
And you have these two parts of the business. You have a layer of technology making things more seamless, which previously were probably done in I would assume, a pretty clunky and slow way. But talk to us about your personal inspiration to found this and why and how you saw the opportunity. I mean, Freada was just talking about distance traveled, but also having proximity to a problem to really understand how to best tackle it.
Yeah, I think I deeply believe that technology had the capacity to be able to scale change. It just meant that there weren't people like me that I saw creating software as a solution or using that platform to be able to solve the kind of communities that we all grew up in. And so what was most concerning to us is we were actually sitting in the state of Michigan and heard about people who were being incarcerated. People most likely to be incarcerated were people with what's called a failure to appear. And it was mostly people with a suspended driver's license. And so the people who were most likely to not show up were moms who were driving their kids to school so they couldn't take a day off. And so it was clear to us the consequences of not being able to afford debt were not just kind of personal, like the feelings of being struck with it, but you could lose your license, end up incarcerated, lose your children. And so what I was clear on is what the consequences of all those things mean to families. And I was like, I'd been in tech for a bit, and I realized there's a lot of dudes creating software for their problems. How do I get a taxi at night when I leave the club? Who's going to walk my dog? Who's going to pick up my dry cleaning? And that just wasn't the best of what I thought technology had to offer.
Yeah, it's so interesting because if you think about the implications of building a business that's a very different type of tech business that maybe may have broader social implications on the people you're helping. I want to hear a little bit about your own story fundraising, and you've raised about $50 million. You have some big companies in there, such as First Round Capital, in addition to Kapor. Also, Howard Schultz is an investor. Did you have challenges fundraising? I do think it's worth pointing out that women of color draw the smallest percentage of venture capital funding, just a fraction of 1%. And the bar is incredibly high for people who are not white men, right, raising money.
Yeah, and I think the statistics tell the story, right? To your point, less than 0.5% of venture capital goes especially to Black women, and to other women of color, I think, face the consequences of raising. I think it's been why I've been very purposeful to be able to identify investors who understand how we're building a business that meets the needs of the communities that I came from. I think it's such a crazy dichotomy that we're like, it's social impact to solve problems for poor Black and brown people, but it's not social impact to solve problems for dudes who get out of college, straight out of college. And so I think people have to have a vision for believing. So there's no question that it's more difficult to be able to raise as a woman and as a Black woman. I think it's why I've been very purposeful about the type of investors that we've cultivated. I think, to your point, Howard Schultz, amazing human. The Kapor is amazing, remarkable, supportive humans. And First Round and XYZ, we've been very purposeful. It's also why we joke, it's like we're not trying to go meet active stranger investors. We often are saying, like, who are the people that have clarity about what we're trying to build? And those are the people that we seek out to partner with.
And I was very struck by the fact that your company is profitable, which is not always true of companies that are tech based that are your size. Typically takes a long time to get to profitability. At what point did you become profitable, and why was that important to you in the company's journey?
I do think there is something important, especially being a Black woman. For me, I understood the bar was different. And I wanted to be able to make sure that our company was a company. And I also understood the consequence of being one of the few Black women that's raised this much capital. I have a deep desire to win, not just for myself, not just for the people we serve, but to be clear that there should be more people who have this opportunity. And so it's something that makes us different. And so we became profitable last year. We just closed the quarter profitable on GAAP and cash. And I actually feel very excited that one of our investors was like, go kill profitability. You got this. You don't need to worry. You know how to get there. But I think, as you asked about the question of investors, I think part of what makes us very appealing is we're serving a large market. We're profitable. We're growing. And I think those things really matter because the bar is different for Black women in venture capital.
And can you give us a hint of where your company is going from here? How big is the addressable market? And how big is the potential to really change the underlying social infrastructure around some of these issues?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the market is huge if you think about government spending, right? If you think we want to be able to both bring government money in, whether it's taxes or water bills or parking tickets, but we also want to get money out. And so if you just look at, for example, the infrastructure bill and the climate bill that just passed that have things like rebates, which are worth almost, when you look at $10 and $20 billion just on those things alone, the TAM, or the total addressable market, is almost $1 trillion. For us, when we look at growth, we grew 16 times over last year. We'll grow again this year. And so it really is making sure that the company grows and that we're clear about how do we achieve the best results for the people we seek to serve, to show that things that are scalable and treat people with dignity and respect can also be good businesses.
Well, Phaedra, it was great to learn about your company in the Kapor's book. I highly recommend the book, and also chapter 4 that's all about you. Phaedra Ellis-Lamkins, CEO of Promise, thanks so much for talking to us today.
Thank you, and thank you for highlighting the Kapors. We adore them, and they are as good as it gets.
Now we're going to bring in a CEO of a company which is focused on helping other companies with their DEI programs. Joelle Emerson, she's CEO and co-founder of Paradigm. It's a company which designs, implements, measures, and tracks DEI programs. Joelle, explain to us, how does Paradigm work?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me today. So we work with organizations to help them build more diverse workforces, build more equitable practices and policies, and build more inclusive cultures. Over the past almost decade since we got started, we've worked with over 1,000 companies with a suite of products and services that help them make progress. So part of it is structural and systemic. How do we understand organizations' data? How do I identify the key barriers that are actually standing in the way of making progress on DEI and design more equitable policies, practices, processes that allow people from all backgrounds to be successful and thrive? And then part of it is recognizing that your culture is shaped every single day and reshaped every single day by the people that come to work in your organization, by the way they interact with each other, by the decisions that they make about each other. So another huge area of focus for us is how do we enable the people that come to work every day to be better equipped to make more equitable decisions and to foster more inclusive relationships in their work.
So it sounds like in this multi-part plan, it's both sort of in terms of the onboarding, but also a constant evaluation of how companies are operating. How has your vision for the product evolved over the past decade? And what was your original intent and where are you now?
Our original intent was pretty vague. We didn't have any goals to, build a certain type of company or, see certain kind of growth rates. What we really wanted to do was to better solve a challenge that we saw a lot of companies talking about, but not really making a lot of progress on. So when we got started, my co-founders and I wanted to take a more data-driven and evidence-based approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion. We wanted to understand if we can use data to better understand the challenges organizations are facing now. And if we can design thoughtful strategies to address those things, we'll better be able to know if our strategies are working because we'll have baseline data. It won't take 10 years to look back and say, oh, I guess that didn't really work. What should we try next? We'll actually know along the way, are we making progress? So that's kind of all we wanted to do when we got started. We started off just as a consulting firm. We went into organizations. We worked in a really high touch way. We did a lot of very manual data analyses, strategy design, workshops, and trainings. Fast forward to today, we've really learned from our clients what it is that they need. We've amassed a huge set of data from working with over 1,000 companies on what interventions work and under what circumstances. And based on all of that learning, we've built products that help our clients scale this kind of impact, that help them deliver effective learning programs, for example, across their global offices to hundreds of thousands of people, or to actually, instead of just guessing at how well they're doing, to actually benchmark their DEI maturity against peers and understand not just what does our representation look like, but what are all the factors that are creating those representation outcomes? What's happening in our hiring process? What's happening with respect to attrition? When we ask people, do you feel engaged here? Do you feel included? What answers are we getting? And importantly, how do those answers differ depending on someone's identity? So those are all the things that we're doing today. And we're continuing to learn with our clients, what is it that actually works to move the needle so that we can then go help them scale those types of impactful initiatives.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in using data to overcome unconscious bias and the like. I think it's worth noting that you were an original author of the Equal Pay Act and in California have been really focused on this. Talk to us about what you're seeing in terms of inequity in layoffs.
Yeah, I think I saw an article not long ago that was sort of touting the fact that women across a number of tech company layoffs only comprised 45% of the laid off employees, and that actually this is not having a negative impact on inclusion or representation. What that kind of data point misses is the fact that women aren't 45% of a lot of these companies doing layoffs. So if women are, as they are, 26% of represented employees in a given industry like technology, and 45% of women are being laid off, that's actually erasing DEI gains that organizations have made over the past several years. Or if Black employees are 7.5% of layoffs, but we're only 5 or 6% of the organization, those layoffs are actually having a disproportionately negative impact on inclusion. And that's really what I'm worried about in this moment, is that in this sort of economic downturn, organizations are going to make decisions that hit women of color in particular, hardest, and that actually erase some of the progress that these organizations might have actually been making over the past few years.
Joelle, that seems like such a big risk right now. What would your argument be to companies to not fall prey to that? Is there an argument that you have seen play out in the data among your customers, your clients, that maintaining that DEI work, investing in it further, actually gives them a financial advantage?
Well, first of all, we have recent research that shows that Organizations whose employees believe they are committed to DEI see 3x higher engagement levels from employees. So even if you're not hiring, for example, you probably want the people that you have on your team today to feel engaged, to be productive, to be motivated. You want the best employees to stay. Actually investing in building an inclusive culture is critical to achieving those outcomes. Not to mention the decades of research that we have and that are super well established now that diverse teams are more innovative. They're better at solving complex problems. I also think for organizations that care about their broader social impact, which a growing number of organizations really do, thinking about not only what is happening within the four walls of our organization, but what are the ripple effects of the choices we make on our team today? What does it mean when we have, disproportionately white men at the decision-making table? How does that affect the investing decisions we make, as Freada and Mitch were talking about, or the products that we build? And then the last thing I would say, and this is a conversation we're having with a lot of organizations right now, is doesn't necessarily mean you have to make a huge financial investment to make progress on DEI. I'm a big proponent of not having DEI as some side program that exists apart from all of your other business initiatives. Instead, what organizations really need to think about is, how do we embed this into our existing practices and processes? If we're going to be doing hiring, let's hire more equitably. If we're going to be doing performance management, let's make sure that we're evaluating performance in ways that are less susceptible to bias. If we're going to be setting compensation, which we are, let's make sure that we're doing that in more equitable ways. So it's not always about big, splashy, expensive initiatives. It's about doing the things that you're already doing in more effective, more thoughtful, and ultimately more inclusive ways.
And it seems like that approach also possibly will have larger impact just to sort of transform the companies over the long run. What a perfect note to end on. Joelle Emerson, the CEO and co-founder of Paradigm. Thank you so much for talking to us today.
For having me.
And finally, last up but not least, we have the CEO of Parentaly, Allison Whalen. She is focused with Parentaly on helping companies manage parental leave and to use it as a competitive advantage with their employees. So Allison, explain to us, what is Parentaly? How does it work?
Yeah, thank you for having me. So Parentaly is a career-focused parental leave program. So what that means is we take expecting employees from about 3 months before their parental leave starts, and we partner them with a career coach that is trained by us and works for us. Then we support them all the way through their return to work experience after they take their parental leave. And in turn, we also train and support their managers so that the managers are empowered to turn parental leave into a really positive experience. And both of them leverage our customized, personalized toolkit. So based on their function, their role, their seniority, we're going to be asking them to do very different things at very specific moments in time to make sure that parental leave is not the moment where careers start to falter, which is what historically has been the case.
Yeah, you're tackling a very specific problem here that it's specific, but it's also widely felt. Why did you want to start this company? What was the impetus? And what do you see as the opportunity to drive change?
Yeah, it is very specific, and that was intentional, because when you look at research, the moment when a woman has a child is the moment when she begins to fall off of her career trajectory. It's when the gender wage gap begins to widen. And so there's a reason for that. And of course, there are many other challenges associated with being a working mother or working parent, but that's when the problem starts. And so my personal experience, which is when I started working on this, is I had my first child in 2017, and I was shocked at the experience of having a child. You think it's going to be this, I was very fortunate and privileged. Unlike most people in the United States, I had a paid parental leave. And so I went out on a 3-month paid parental leave, and I walked back into a disaster. My projects had stalled. My team had missed their goals. My direct reports were very unhappy because they had not been supported appropriately in my absence. But I didn't know how to set up my parental leave for success, and my manager didn't know how to help me. And so I ended up coming back, and I missed so many things within the leadership team. I had sort of been pushed aside inadvertently. And I just looked around and I said, no wonder so many women are dropping out of the workforce or aren't achieving the level of seniority that they want within their career, because it's really difficult to step away from your job for 3, 4, many companies now offer 5 and 6 months of paid leave. And while that's wonderful, and every company should, I always push for that. There should be a national mandate providing paid parental leave. That's wonderful. But we can't just say, okay, good luck. And then you come back and we throw all of the things at your feet that you've missed over the past 6 months. There is a better way. And when I came back from my first parental leave, I looked around to other peers and eventually thousands of other women and men, and they all had the same experience. It didn't matter if they were at a small company or a large company. Everybody loved that they got paid leave, but said it did damage to their careers.
So what is the argument you make to the companies? I mean, the argument for the women is very clear. I went on maternity leave, and I feel like the world has changed a lot since then. But I feel like I can understand and personally relate to that challenge of coming back and saying, what did I miss when I was gone? But what's the argument to the companies about why they should be investing in this and how it might help them over the long run?
Yeah, the argument to the company is, you have already decided to provide extended paid parental leave, and that is costing you millions upon millions of dollars, but it's the right thing to do because you know you're doing it because you're getting better talent, you're retaining talent because of it. Quite frankly, it's a must-have at progressive organizations that are going after top talent. And so you're already investing millions and millions of dollars. All you need to do is spend a fraction of that money to either bring us in or build it yourself, and actually turn that policy into a success. Because otherwise you risk, in my case, I came back and I wanted to quit. And it wasn't because my company didn't want to do the right thing. They wanted to do the right thing. They just didn't know what it was. They gave me a promotion. They threw more money at me. That didn't solve the problem because I had already missed too much and my career had stalled because of my parental leave. And so the argument we really focus on, you want to retain talent. You also want to ramp your talent faster, which is something that we do via our re-onboarding and our manager support. And you also want people to be really engaged because that also translates into increased productivity. And so it is really, to us, a no-brainer. They've already made the huge investment. Now let's spend 1% of those funds to turn it into a success.
So talk to us a little bit about how you're going to be expanding this program. You just talked about your own experience being in a privileged position, being a boss of other people. But what about people who are hourly workers who may not have such privilege or may not even have access to such generous leave policies?
Yeah. So when we started the company, we were really focused on very senior women, mid to late 30s who are managing teams. You know, we kind of took this very extreme privileged persona. Then over time, we have developed the program utilizing tech, which allows us to do this, to get best practices and make it much more personalized and applicable to any, we say corporate or sort of salaried employee to date. So we've managed to go from a very niche population to now we support fathers, we support any method of welcoming a child, whether it's adoption or surrogacy or whatnot. And so we've started that expansion. What we're doing next year is then moving to other like hourly workers and people who aren't really in a corporate setting, you know? And so, but the most important part there is we're not just going to take the program that we have today and put it on a different employee base. We need to actually do the research to understand what are their problems and how do we meet them where they are. So for me as a manager of, I just came back from my own third and final parental leave. And it's very different when I'm planning for my leave and the resources that I need and the questions that I need to think through, the coverage plan, setting up my team for success, thinking through my communication plan while I'm on leave. That is very different than a retail worker. And what they need to be successful. They need different things. They still have challenges with parental leave, but their challenges are much more around how am I going to get paid? How do I make sure that I understand the policy? If I need to extend my leave, how do I talk to my manager about a better schedule when I return? Because sometimes in retail environments, for example, your seniority gives you better options for scheduling that's more aligned with being a parent. And so there are a lot of things that we will continue to build towards, but it's important that we don't just take the experience of the corporate employee and assume that it will be the same for everyone.
And certainly there seem like there are many positive possible outcomes in terms of the way you'll be impacting all sorts of different parts of the workforce. Allison Whalen, CEO of Parentaly, thank you so much for joining us today. I just want to thank Our other guests on today's show, Mitch and Freada Kapor Klein, Promise co-founder and CEO Phaedra Ellis-Lamkins, as well as Joelle Emerson, the CEO of Paradigm. Thank you all for joining us. I hope you had a productive conversation here, thinking about how all of these companies are really not just showing their financial success, but also driving positive change. I'm Julia Boorstin here for CNBC Closing the Gap and Make It.